Josh, it's been a week.
Ryan, I'm just surprised you want to do another one of these things with me. I mean, we show up, we make things happen, but yeah, it was a ton of fun last week, and I'm excited to be here for episode number 2.
I found a really interesting use case of recruiters using AI specifically for the ATSs that don't yet have like natural language search. Not sure if you've been hearing anything about that, but happy to kind of dive in and tell you what I found out.
Yeah, not yet. I'm familiar with a lot of them that are already using like an AI service to do like sourcing or candidate matching or things like that, just inside or even generating emails and stuff. But I haven't heard of this one yet, so I'm interested to learn.
Are you familiar with our friend Boolean search?
I do. I learned about a Boolean search using LinkedIn Sales Navigator actually many years ago, so I am familiar with that.
So lots of recruiters love themselves a good Boolean search. Of course, we hear a lot about it because they don't really have good data in their ATS to do Boolean search effectively. So us automatically taking notes and updating the ATS really helps in that regard.
Mhm.
So I asked one of our customers, how are you doing Boolean searches today? Like, how do you come up with what to make the Boolean search and really make it good? Because they seem to have a ton of great candidates for each role, and they weren't really struggling with that. Like I hear other recruiters struggling with it, and they use our friend ChatGPT 4.0, and they put down their job description that was generated by Quill or
Mhm.
other. And then they ask ChatGPT 4.0, can you make me a Boolean search for this role? And the elaborate Boolean strings that it makes is actually intense. Like it is crazy. It goes so in depth and does it really well. Something that I've seen for the first time someone use AI not to generate an email or a job description, but to generate their Boolean search. Of course, I think the ATSs that have more of like the natural language search and the
Mhm.
automated candidate matching, you don't really need to do that. But for the folks that are using ATSs that don't have those things implemented yet, that's a really good hack. That is what I was most excited about this week.
That is actually pretty cool. To your point, that's a new one that I haven't heard of that I actually really like because I've heard of people using it to like create job descriptions after an intake call or doing something like that. But I'd say from a lot of the conversations that I have with recruiters, like the biggest thing that they find is a challenge. It's obviously the biggest thing of a job in general, whether that's a sales job or recruiting job, is like finding the right people to speak to, right? Like that's always the hardest part of it, right? Like when you're actually on the call, pitching the client, doing the things that we need to be doing, that's what we love to do. And that's really why we're in roles like this too, in these customer facing roles.
It was interesting because they can even format it, like create a format that's accepted by LinkedIn, create a format that's accepted by my ATS, because all of them have their own like little finicky pieces. They were using ChatGPT 4.0, but if you use something that is more powered by like the internet, like Google, etc., I don't see why you couldn't use something like that to scrape like, hey, go on monster.com or like
Mhm.
whatever recruiting job board and look for these people. Like I feel like you can get even more creative with it. That's a good seed that customer planted.
I think one of the biggest trends that I'm hearing about right now inside of AI and recruiting too is how it can be used to improve the quality of hires. Employees are kind of the biggest aspect that can make or break a company. Like who that hire is either a 10x hire or that's we probably could have done a better job there. And we all know and heard the horror stories around the impact that can have, like a 6 month turnaround time, 30% of the salary. That's just costly for any business in general, not even counting a startup where cash flow is actually so important. I'm even just thinking through further ways, like using that Boolean search idea through ChatGPT. How could you use that to even find candidates that you might not have been able to see before? Because I even know the joke that you and I always had was like, I was never found on LinkedIn. It was always a joke. I was just always hidden because I would never posted or did anything on LinkedIn. So I was never found. So I find that's really interesting who that can actually free up from a candidate side of things as we're looking through these searches.
Yeah, especially if you experiment to try to use a Boolean search in all these different channels that before you just didn't have the time or bandwidth to do. Another thing, I know last time we were talking about like where we think AI might not be a good place in the cycle. One thing I found on the news is someone that was very upset because they actually got rejected after an AI interview. And
Mhm.
it kind of blew back on the company because they felt that the company didn't even give them a fair chance, and they tried to not spend the time with them to actually make them feel like a worthy candidate. So it's really interesting of just communicating with candidates if you're going to start incorporating AI to actually do your interviews for you, how you're kind of framing that. And it doesn't mean it's not going to be a part of the process in the future. It's just you need to be very mindful around how you're framing that to candidates.
Yeah.
What the purpose of it? You shouldn't say, "Hey, Ryan, the CEO is going to interview you," and then it's an AI version of Ryan. Like that's probably not a good idea.
No.
And it sounded like that's kind of where they approached it. They were trying to make the people believe that they were getting interviewed, but it was an AI. And like I know we were talking about potentially having ChatGPT 4.0 participate in this webinar with us one week, and we're like, it's not really ready for that, I don't think.
Not yet. To your point too, I was actually reading Korn Ferry's State of Recruiting article that came out earlier this week too, speeding up the volume of screening. I think finding out where in the niche of recruiting this can really be used, because if we're looking at especially more technical roles or executive recruiting, even in the article from Korn Ferry, they're like, those might not be the right places to actually leverage AI from like a screening side of things, right? Especially when you're doing those initial screening calls. And also keeping with that trend of like skills first hiring, especially when we're looking at more higher end roles or executive roles, where we know that individuals from those stages of development are just working longer, right? Like the average retirement age is getting pushed back, executives are staying in place longer as well. And we're not seeing as many of those earlier opportunities open up for younger members in these roles. It's because we have so many skilled people in those roles today. But we know that can only last so long, because there's going to be a point where they're going to look to exit the workforce. And so the one thing I'd love to riff on with you for a bit, how could it be used to make sure that we're actually keeping like a human element involved inside of it, while also doing that skills first hiring? Because I know this traditionally using general screening from like a resume standpoint, there's so many contexts that are missed out. If you miss this keyword, it's not going to pick you up. So
Yeah.
what are some ways that you even think, putting you on the spot here, that it can be used to do that firsthand?
I think it's more going to change the game for like assessments than like screenings. If you're in a technical role, maybe it's a coding assessment. If you're in a marketing role, maybe it's like an assignment where you have to do like a SEO blog or something like that. I think those assessments are actually in a better spot to get replaced by AI rather than the screenings for like the culture fit. Because that first moment, the candidate, like we always say, the candidate's evaluating the company and role just as much as the reverse is happening.
Yeah.
And I get it's more of a buyer's market today, where there's a lot more candidates than jobs. Like we posted a job for a full stack developer role.
Yeah.
And within 24 hours, we got 900 applicants. We're looking for ways to actually automate more of that assessment, the code testing piece. We even hear from customers, like a lot of, especially for technical roles, like the candidates are committing fraud by trying to outsource the work to not great regions. They might say, hey, like, yeah, I'm based in the US, but in all reality, I've actually heard a recruiter say this, they're in North Korea trying to outsource the work there, and using that way to like funnel the money. So like there's like a ton of weird things that happen, these code testing assignments where you can track their IP address to see if they're actually located where they say they're located. So I think there's just a lot of room for AI to solve the problem set that's in that environment, because then it's more black and white. It's like, did they do this correctly or not? Whereas initial screening call, that again, it's more about like the culture fit and the alignment, it's less black and white oftentimes. And I fear like that's going to make candidates that should get through to the next round just passed on, because they don't fit like this really concrete like checkbox that really should be a little bit more dotted lines, gray lines.
Well, I 100% agree with that, because even with that exact same trend that they're seeing inside of recruiting, just reading a lot of these articles as well, it's like, how will recruiters lean more into soft skills when we know there might actually be skill gaps from some of those candidates, just based on they don't have an opportunity to get all the relevant experience. And this is coming from me as a first-time head of sales here too. I've done a lot of overlap inside of the roles. I've read every book that you could ever think of, and I stalk anybody who talks about this kind of stuff too, but it's still my first time doing it. And obviously from our relationship, we knew the history of us back and forth, so it wasn't as big of a risk for a hire. But we always know those stretch roles are the ones that can add a lot of risk. And even seeing like, how can we make sure that we have all the culture fits and all the soft skills down tight, and this, what are the gaps in the skills that they have to learn, and what is the plan that they're going to put into place as an individual candidate to make sure they're bridging some of those skill gaps? Because there's a so many articles out there too. I was even reading one on LinkedIn earlier that was saying like managers might actually be willing to hire people that might only have 60 to 70% of the skills needed. So those soft skills might even be more important. So I really like that idea that you were mentioning where it's like, how can like a AI tool not be used for the screening side, but maybe for more of those cognitive test sides? Because I do think their culture fit, like that willingness to learn, like that ability to show grit, and like those other intangible skills that we're looking at, of those really positive attributes that can make a great fit for a role, are going to be so much more important. It's not always what have you done, but what are you willing to do to make sure you can actually get this job done properly. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really cool point.
It's all about the framing, to the earlier point about that person that had that backlash that happened. Like, hey, like we had a really great conversation. Would love to move you on in the next step of the interview process. The next step is we're going to be doing an assessment. Maybe it's like a code test or something like that. That will be powered by AI, so that we can keep a consistent and fair process. And then the next step after that would be talking to the hiring manager.
Yeah.
Now there's transparency and alignment with that process, rather than being like caught off guard where like you're talking to Susie like the ChatGPT clone. Like that's just like it can really affect candidates in that regard. And I feel people are too trigger happy right now with trying to implement things like that. I talk to Jordan, our CTO, all the time. And a lot of the reasons why we choose to do something or not do it is based on the likelihood of hallucinations with AI. Anybody that's used any AI tool has probably experienced some sort of hallucination. When you look at doing a screening and having an AI interpret whether what they did was correct or not, there's a lot less room for hallucination in that. But when they're doing more anecdotal, opinion-based pieces and reflection on something, that's when hallucination risk is way, way higher. And that's why in our platform, where we like transcribe and like summarize interviews, we don't provide any sentiment analysis, because we just find the hallucination risk is way too high still. That can change over and over time, but right now, we want to be really conscious of where hallucinations can be more of a risk than others.
Where else do you see those hallucinations potentially making an impact to recruiters in general using something like AI? Because obviously note taking and some of those tools that are out there, just like using a chat GPT maybe to summarize things as a write-up, that's an area that I can think of it coming in. But where else are you seeing it or thinking of it?
I would say candidate matching. Like you really want to test that and put it through the ringer to make sure it's not hallucinating, or else it's just going to add more work. If you're getting a list of candidates that say, hey, like they have these requirements, but then you don't see it right off the bat, and you're looking all over for 15 minutes trying to find out where did it say that they have experience in working at a finance company. I don't see any finance companies on their resume. That's a big problem, because you're just reallocating the work. Yeah, it took you a lot less time to make the list, but now it's taking you so much time to edit the list, right? Like that's the problem. We have audio recordings, right? And we've made like a ton of strides in hallucinations for like a transcript. Like we have 99% accuracy, if not 95% accuracy for folks with maybe like some like heavier accents and whatnot, and depending on the language that they're speaking, because we support different languages. But we give the audio file as a source that you can like double check against. And again, our customers find it works really, really well. But from a candidate matching perspective, I think the need for sources, like citing, hey, this is where I found it in this part of the resume, can provide the certainty to the recruiter to more effectively do that last 10% of the 10-80-10, right? Because if you're forced to review it from scratch, you might as well just build the list from scratch, not using AI. But if it can guide you to like, hey, like this is where I found these things, and it's citing its work a little bit, that can just give you a lot more confidence to actually lean on it as a tool, because that's what we want. We want to be able to lean on tools and trust tools. I think that's something that we'll see a lot of companies coming around to, is providing more effort on that last 10%. Because right now, most companies are focused on that first 10%. How do we prompt it effectively? How do we start using AI? And then right now, all the customers of these big ATSs and stuff like that are just completely reliant on themselves to do the review and the fact checking.
I actually really like that example too, and just using different ways to prompt it and getting more specific. Again, kind of like that Boolean search thing earlier, even using that as well for creating like job descriptions or outreach as well to certain candidates based on that information too. I think it's a really cool point.
Well, it was great chatting with you this week, Josh. I know one thing that we wanted everybody to do is tag the people that you want to see on the show. As mentioned in our first episode, we want to have a lot of different diverse guests to from all the different aspects of recruiting to come on, share their ideas, share what they're seeing. So if there's anybody that you really want us to have on the show, feel free to tag them and we'll make sure to give them a shout.
Appreciate it, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye.